"And if you beat me at chess, the company is yours," joked the millionaire CEO at the cleaning lady who was cleaning his game room. Sure, she didn't even know how to move the pieces. He laughed at his own joke, but his smile disappeared when she accepted the challenge. With an eerie calm, she walked to the board, which was in the middle of an old game, and made a single move. She announced checkmate. The CEO looked confused, and his blood froze. That wasn't just any move. It was the secret move of his late father, a move only the true heir of the company would know how to make. The top of the world smelled of Italian leather and freshly ground coffee. For Richard, CEO of one of the largest investment firms in Midtown Manhattan, this was the aroma of success. A fragrance he inhaled with the same arrogance with which he breathed the rarefied air of his penthouse office. The game room was his throne, a sanctuary of glass and steel overlooking the concrete jungle of the New York skyline. There, at the center of everything, rested his pride, an ivory and onyx chessboard, a piece of art that cost more than the first apartments of many of his employees. The pieces, carved with surgical precision, looked like small statues from an ancient kingdom, a kingdom where he was the sole sovereign. Richard Tiege, a former collegiate chess champion, used that board not just to play, but to assert his dominance. It was common for him to challenge his engineers and analysts, brilliant young minds fresh out of the best Ivy League schools, only to dismantle their strategies in minutes, a mocking smile on his lips. It was a way to remind them who was in charge, who possessed the intellectual and financial capital. His vast fortune came not just from his business acumen, but from his ability to predict market movements, just as he predicted his opponent's moves on the board. That Tuesday afternoon, the tension in the room was palpable, but it stemmed from a high-definition screen. Richard was in an online match against a Russian grandmaster, a living legend of the sport. The game was being live-streamed to a select audience of executives and investors, all on video conference, witnessing the spectacle. The game was at a complex impasse, one of those positions that go into the history books. Richard analyzed the digital board, sweat shining on his brow, not from nervousness, but from pure adrenaline. He loved the pressure, the sensation that his intellectual net worth was being put to the test. On the other side of the screen, the faces of his board members reflected a mixture of admiration and flattery. He was the king, and everyone else there was his pawn. It was at that moment that the glass door slid open smoothly, almost soundlessly. Mrs. Amelia entered, pushing her cleaning cart with the discretion of someone who had learned a lifetime how not to be noticed. With her grey hair pulled back in a simple bun and an impeccable uniform, she was an element from another reality in that environment of luxury and power. She began her work in the opposite corner of the room, spraying a mild-smelling liquid on the glass panels, moving the cloth in slow, methodical circles. Her eyes, however, for a brief instant, fell upon the ivory and onyx board. It wasn't a look of coveting the piece's value, but of a silent, almost reverent curiosity, as if she recognized something familiar in that geometry of silent war. Richard, noticing the diverted attention, saw the perfect opportunity for his theater. He needed a distraction, a moment to reaffirm his superiority while he thought about his next move. He cleared his throat, drawing the attention of everyone on the video call. "Enjoying the pieces, Amelia?" he asked, his voice laced with silken sarcasm. The contained chuckles on the other side of the screen were immediate. "I bet you don't even know how to move the knights, do you? Tell you what, I'm feeling generous today." He stood up, the leather chair making a soft scrape, and walked over to the physical board, pointing to the replica of the complex, paused game. "Let's make a deal. If you beat me in chess, the company is yours. Ha 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 ha." The laughter echoed through the room, amplified by the speakers. The humiliation was public, a cruel spectacle for his audience. Richard reveled in her discomfort, in the power he had to diminish anyone around him. Go on, try. Just one move. Touch the right piece and I'll promote you, he insisted, a predatory smile plastered on his face, waiting for her to shrink away and leave the room. But, to his surprise, she merely sighed, a tired breath that seemed to carry the weight of decades. She set the cleaning cloth on the cart and walked slowly toward the board. Her hands, calloused from years of labor, hovered over the battlefield of ivory and onyx, a stark contrast between life's hardship and the game's opulence. What she would do next, no one could have predicted. The silence that fell over the game room was heavier than the marble beneath their feet. The laughter on the video call died abruptly, replaced by a hum of confusion and inaudible murmurs. Richard remained motionless, the arrogant smile frozen into a mask of disbelief. His eyes, which minutes before shone with superiority, were now fixed on the board, scanning the lines of attack and defense, desperately trying to find a flaw, a gap, a single refutation for what he saw. But there was none. The pawn's move, so insignificant, so humble, had been like a key that unlocked a cascade of unavoidable threats. The bishop, previously hidden and harmless, now aimed at the heart of his kingdom. The rook, on its open file, completed the trap. It was checkmate, a forced mate in one move, simple, brutal, and undeniably brilliant. He, who had built a financial empire based on his ability to see patterns and calculate risks, couldn't process the scene. The logic that governed his world, the same logic that allowed him to turn investments into fortunes, had shattered against the serenity of a cleaner. "Richard, what happened there?" The voice of Marcus, his right-hand man, sounded through the speakers, tinged with a genuine concern that stood out from the others. Usual flattery. Was that a joke? What did she do? Richard couldn't answer. His throat was dry, his mind a whirlpool of denial. This couldn't be real. Maybe he had miscalculated the initial position. Maybe the Russian Grandmaster had made a gross error. But deep down, he knew the truth. The position was solid, and the solution, found by her, was perfect. The humiliation was absolute, not just for having been defeated, but for the way it happened, publicly, without fanfare, by hands he considered unworthy even of dusting his achievements. Meanwhile, the call chat exploded. The message from the Russian Grandmaster, Ivan Volkov, flashed in capital letters. "That move, where did that come from? Only one person in the world made that pawn sacrifice. Who is with you, Mrs. Amelia, oblivious to the digital chaos and the storm forming inside Richard, had already returned to her cleaning cart. With the same calm with which she had moved the pawn, she picked up her cloth and spray bottle, ready to finish her work on the glass. Her tranquility was the most disconcerting thing of all. There wasn't a hint of triumph on her face, nor a glimmer of satisfaction in her eyes. It was as if defeating a financial market and chess genius was as routine as wiping a coffee stain. This indifference was a deeper blow than any noisy celebration could be. She was in her own world, a world where his arrogance barely scratched the surface. The sight of her, back turned to him, methodically cleaning the glass that reflected his pale, shocked face, made Richard's blood boil and freeze simultaneously. Who was this woman? Volkov's words echoed in his mind. Only one person in the world. An old, dusty memory began to stir in the back of his consciousness, a story his first chess coach had told him about an American chess legend, a young prodigy who had appeared out of nowhere, won every championship, and then vanished without a trace 30 years ago, a name whispered with reverence and mystery in chess clubs. He looked at the board, at the impossible move. He looked at the back of the woman in the uniform. A chill ran down his spine. It wasn't possible. It was an absurd coincidence. He, a multimillionaire whose assets spanned stocks, real estate, and even cryptocurrency, could not have his universe shaken by a figure from the past. Finally, he found a thread of voice. "Amelia," he called, the name sounding strange and fragile on his own lips. She stopped by the door, her hand on the frame, but did not turn around. The suspense stretched the air. He needed to know, needed her to deny the madness blooming in his mind. With a choked voice, he asked the silence of her back, "Who are you?" Richard's question hung in the charged air of the room, fragile and desperate. For a long moment, Mrs. Amelia remained with her back to him, a silhouette against the corridor light. The world seemed to hold its breath, awaiting her response. Richard felt his heart hammer against his ribs, an erratic beat that echoed the disorder in his mind. Then slowly she turned, not completely, just enough for him to see her profile, her face marked by lines of fatigue and a serenity that disarmed him. Her eyes held neither contempt nor triumph, only a deep, unfathomable melancholy. She faced him for a second, and in that gaze he saw not the cleaner, but a silent authority he had never known. "I'm just the woman who cleans your office, Dr. Richard," she said, her voice soft yet firm, cutting through the silence. Nothing more. And with that answer, which answered nothing and yet said everything, she turned and left, closing the glass door behind her with a soft click. The sound was like the snap of a breaking bone. Richard was left alone, the echo of her words reverberating in the emptiness. Nothing more. The simplicity of the phrase was a greater insult than any accusation. She had reduced him and his empire, to a mere detail in her workday. He, the man whose name made the stock market tremble, whose decisions moved millions in investment capital, had been dismissed with the same ease one discards a used napkin. He stumbled back to his desk, the video call screen still lit, displaying a gallery of perplexed faces. Marcus Noy, his VP, was still trying to talk to him, but the words were a distant noise. Richard felt dozens of eyes on him, judging him, dissecting his weakness. His image of absolute control, the foundation upon which he built his business and his fortune, lay in ruins. With a sharp gesture, he ended the call, plunging the room into an oppressive silence. Alone, the weight of the humiliation crushed him. He approached the onyx and ivory board, the stage of his downfall. His fingers trembled as he touched the small pawn that had sealed his fate. He picked it up, feeling the cold weight of the piece in his palm. It wasn't luck. No one would be lucky enough to find a combination like that. That was art, a grasp of the game so profound that it transcended mere technique. It was the move of someone who didn't just see pieces on a board, but the ebb and flow of a battle, the soul of the game. He thought about his net worth, the profitability charts of his investments, the cash flow reports he analyzed with surgical precision. He had always believed the world was a logical system, a set of variables that could be controlled and exploited for profit. But Amelia, with a single move, had introduced a variable he couldn't quantify. She was an anomaly in his perfectly calculated universe. The initial shock began to give way to an emotion more familiar to Richard: rage, a cold, cutting rage. Who did she think she was to enter his sanctuary and strip him of his dignity? He wouldn't let it go. It wasn't about chess anymore. It was about power. He needed to understand, needed to unravel the mystery she represented. Knowledge was power, and he would use all his vast resources to obtain it. He grabbed his smartphone, the device that was an extension of his will, and dialed a number from his private contact list. It wasn't his lawyer, nor his accountant. It was Torres, the head of his personal security, a former intelligence operative known for his discreet efficiency and his ability to find any information. The call was answered on the first ring. "Torres," Richard said, his voice low and dangerously calm. "I need a full report on Amelia, the cleaning lady on my floor. I want to know everything about her, where she was born, where she lived, who she spoke to, every step she has taken in the last 30 years. I want it yesterday." The order was given. The hunt had begun. While Richard set his gears of power and money in motion, Mrs. Amelia finished her shift at the commercial building. To the other employees who passed her in the polished corridors, she was practically invisible, part of the human furniture that kept the business world running in the background. No one noticed the slight change in her posture. The way her shoulders, usually stooped by the day's fatigue, seemed a little more erect. No one saw the fleeting spark in her eyes, a flame that hadn't burned in a very long time. As she left the imposing building, the night air of Manhattan enveloped her. She didn't hail a taxi or call a rideshare. Her path was different, one that took her away from the lights of Midtown toward a modest neighborhood in South Queens, where life pulsed at a different rhythm. The bus journey was long, a daily ritual that gave her time to shed the persona of Amelia the cleaner and find herself again. Through the window, the lights of the skyscrapers, symbols of the wealth and assets she had just confronted, receded, replaced by the warmer, more disordered lights of houses and small businesses. She got off at a familiar stop, and the smell of wet asphalt and fresh bread from a nearby bakery greeted her like old friends. Her house was simple, a small brick structure with an iron gate and a small, well-tended garden in front, where lavender and rosemary bloomed. It was her refuge, a world distant from corporate coldness. Upon entering, a young man in his early 20s greeted her with a warm hug. "Hey, Grandma, took you a while today, huh?" said Leo, her grandson. He was the light of her life, the reason for her exhaustive routine. Leo had the same intelligent look as his grandmother, but his dreams were different. He was studying software engineering at a state college, a daily battle that required dedication and sacrifices. Tuition was covered, but the costs of books, transport, and food weighed on the family budget. "The boss kept us for an extra cleaning on the executive floor," she lied softly, not wanting to disturb the tranquility of that home with the echoes of her extraordinary afternoon. She didn't mention the chessboard, the humiliating wager, the move that had resurrected a ghost. That was a secret she guarded tightly. Later, after the simple dinner they shared, Amelia went to her room. It was a small space, with antique furniture and a single window overlooking the backyard. Under the bed, inside a shoebox worn by time, was her true treasure. It wasn't jewelry, nor insurance policies, nor treasury bonds. With trembling hands, she pulled out the box and opened it. Inside, yellowed and fragile, were newspaper clippings from 30 years ago. The headlines featured her face, much younger. Next to chessboards, the Queen of the American Gambit, 18-year-old prodigy wins national championship. Amelia Santos, the future of world chess. She ran her fingers over the photographs, a wave of nostalgia and pain washing over her. She remembered that time, the adrenaline of competitions, the respect in her opponents' eyes, the feeling that the world was a board and she knew all its secrets. She picked up one clipping in particular, the news that changed everything. It didn't speak of a victory, but of an absence. Grandmaster Amelia Santos disappears on the eve of the World Tournament. There was no explanation, no farewell. She simply vanished. The chess world speculated, theorized about a nervous breakdown, a sudden illness, a forbidden love, but no one ever knew the truth. The truth was there, in that simple room, in the calloused hands of a woman who had traded the glory of the stage for the invisibility of cleaning to protect something or someone far more valuable than any trophy, any recognition, any legacy of fame. Touching her own young face on the yellowed paper, a single thought crossed her mind. What had she done by moving that pawn? To awaken the past was a risk she had sworn never to take again. The move on Richard's board was not just a checkmate. It was the first move in a much more dangerous game, a game she had abandoned 3 decades ago and which now, she feared, would return to haunt her. Richard's night was a desert of sleep. He, who usually slept the sleep of the just and the billionaire, tossed and turned in his Egyptian cotton sheets, haunted not by nightmares, but by a single white pawn advancing 1 square. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the board, the move, and Amelia's calm, indecipherable gaze. Dawn found him already in his office, even before the first rays of sun touched the tops of the skyscrapers. The room, which had always been his fortress of power, now felt like a cage. He ignored the market reports flashing on his multiple screens, the charts showing the profitability of his investment funds, the emails about acquisitions, and the fluctuation of his stock prices. None of it mattered. His mind, usually a precise calculator of risks and profits, was locked onto a single insoluble equation: Amelia Santos. He paced back and forth, the phone in his hand, waiting for Torres' call. Uncertainty was a poison he wasn't used to tasting. His world was made of data, facts, assets, and liabilities that could be measured and controlled. This woman was an unknown variable threatening his entire system miles away in the modest house in South Queens. Amelia's day began with the aroma of fresh coffee. Her routine was a silent, precise ballet. She prepared breakfast for Leo, making sure he ate well before leaving for college. Watching him sitting at the kitchen table, his eyes focused on a programming textbook while he ate, Dai was the source of all her strength. His future was the only investment she cherished, the only dividend she hoped to reap in life. All her effort, all her invisibility, was to ensure he had the opportunities she herself had once abandoned. While washing the dishes, however, a shadow of worry assailed her. The image of Richard's shocked face returned to her mind. She felt a chill, the same one she felt before a decisive match. Had it been a mistake? Had vanity, a remnant of the young champion she had been, spoken louder than the prudence of the grandmother she had become? She shook her head, trying to push the thought away. It was just a moment. He would forget. Men like Richard had far more important business to worry about than an insolent cleaner. Richard's phone finally rang, the strident sound cutting the tension in his office. It was Torres. "Sir," the voice on the other end was calm, professional. "We have the preliminary information." Richard sat down, his body rigid. "Speak." "Amelia Santos, 61 years old, widow, lives at the same address for 35 years. Has a grandson, Leonardo, 21, engineering student. No police record, no significant debt. Leads an absolutely ordinary life." The word ordinary sounded like mockery. "That's impossible, Torres. Dig deeper. I want her history before those 35 years. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's where things get interesting, sir. Before moving to that house, Amelia Santos's records are virtually non-existent. It's as if she didn't exist before 1995. A ghost." Richard felt a shiver. The coach's story, the vanished chess legend. Everything was starting to fit together in a terrifying way. "Continue," he ordered. Torres hesitated for a moment before proceeding. "While searching for older records, we cross-referenced information about the grandson, Leo. He's the son of a man named Michael Santos, Amelia's only child. And it was while investigating his father that we found something unexpected, something that connects directly to one of your former acquisitions, an investment fund you liquidated many years ago." Richard's heart skipped a beat. One of his old acquisitions. How could that be linked to a cleaner and her son? "What are you talking about, Torres? Be clear." Torres' voice lowered, becoming almost a whisper, as if he feared the reaction his next words would cause. "Michael Santos, Amelia's son, did not die of natural causes, sir. He was the key witness in a financial fraud lawsuit, a lawsuit against the manager of the fund you bought and later dissolved." Richard felt the air leave his lungs. The name of that fund manager, a man who had disappeared with millions in investor money and whom he himself had helped cover up to avoid a scandal in his businesses, rose to his throat like poison. "The lawsuit," Torres continued, "was dismissed shortly after Michael's sudden death, the same time that the greatest promise of American chess, Amelia Santos, vanished off the map. Richard's world, built on the solid foundation of numbers, profits, and absolute control, began to crumble. Torres's words were like a hammer, shattering the glass facade of his penthouse, exposing an abyss he had spent decades ignoring. Michael Santos. The name echoed in his mind. A ghost from a past he believed he had buried under layers of new investments and financial successes. He remembered the case, vaguely. The acquisition of that troubled investment fund had been one of his first major plays, a demonstration of his ability to identify opportunity where others saw only risk. He knew the previous manager, a man named Oswald Merrill, was a swindler, but the price of the assets was too low to resist. Richard bought the fund, absorbed what had value, sold off what didn't, and dissolved the structure to erase the traces of the previous mismanagement. It was common practice on Wall Street, a way to clean up a business's history. At the time, he told himself it wasn't his problem what Oswald had done. His lawyers handled the details, silenced the few complaints, and ensured his newly acquired assets weren't stained. He never worried about the investors who lost money. To him, they were just numbers on a balance sheet. Now, the connection formed in his mind with terrifying clarity. Amelia Santos, Michael Santos, Oswald Merrill. Her disappearance was not a nervous breakdown, it was a flight. She hadn't abandoned chess. She had abandoned a life that had become too dangerous. Her son, Michael, was a witness, a threat, and he, Richard, by buying and dissolving the fund, had inadvertently helped sweep the dirt under the rug, facilitating Oswald's disappearance and ensuring justice was never served. A bitter taste rose in his throat. He wasn't just a passive spectator in that tragedy. He had been a piece on the board, moved by ambition, unaware of the consequences of his plays for the real-world pawns. The arrogance he had felt in humiliating Amelia now turned into corrosive shame. He had seen her as a simple, ignorant woman, someone who barely knew how to move the knights, but she was a queen disguised as a pawn who had sacrificed her own kingdom to protect her son, and she had failed. Meanwhile, in her apartment, Amelia felt a growing unease. The calm of the last few days had dissipated, replaced by an anxiety she knew well. It was the same sensation that had assailed her 30 years ago, the feeling that something was wrong, that invisible eyes were watching her. She looked out the window at the quiet street in her neighborhood, but saw shadows where there were none. Had the chess move been enough? Had it been sufficient to light a beacon over her carefully anonymous existence? She thought of Leo. He was the image of Michael, the same smile, the same bright, curious gaze. The idea that the past could somehow reach him was a terror that paralyzed her. She had lived in the shadows for so long to guarantee his safety, to give him a normal life, free from the fear that had consumed her. She felt guilty for the brief moment of pride in Richard's office. It was a lapse, a dangerous indulgence. She, who always calculated every move 10 steps ahead, had made a beginner's mistake. Night fell, and Richard remained in his office. He had dismissed all the employees. Torres' revelation had forced him into a brutal self-reappraisal of himself and his career. Every dollar of his fortune, every stock in his portfolio, every bar of gold in his vault now seemed tainted. He had always seen himself as a business genius, a predator at the top of the financial food chain. But perhaps he was just a scavenger, profiting from others' misfortune. For the first time in his life, money offered no comfort. It only highlighted the emptiness of his accomplishments. He opened the file Torres had sent him again. There was an old photo of Michael Santos, a smiling young man in his early 20s. Beside it, a more recent photo of Leo, Amelia's grandson, downloaded from a university social media account. The resemblance was undeniable. The pain of Amelia's loss, which he could barely begin to imagine, became palpable. He, who had humiliated a grieving mother, felt the weight of his cruelty. And then he saw another attachment in Torres' email, an audio file. The caption read, "Recording recovered from the archived lawsuit, initial deposition of Michael Santos." With a trembling finger, Richard clicked to listen, unaware that the sound that would fill the silence of his penthouse would launch him onto a path of no return. The voice that came out of Richard's computer speakers was young, clear, and filled with a nervous conviction. It was the voice of Michael Santos, recorded 30 years ago, a ghostly echo of a life interrupted. "I know it sounds crazy," Michael said in the recording, but Oswald Merrill wasn't just stealing investors' money. He was using the fund's structure for something much worse. He was money laundering. "For dangerous people, I saw the records, the names. They aren't the kind of people you report and walk away unharmed." An investigator's voice, deeper and tired, interrupted. "What names, Michael?" "We need names." There was a hesitation, the sound of a deep breath. I can't say. Not yet. My mother, she's a public figure. If her name is associated with this, her career is over. I need to protect her, but I have proof. I saved copies of everything. They're in a safe place." The recording ended there, a fragment of courage and fear frozen in time. Richard recoiled in his chair as if he had been punched. Money laundering, dangerous people. This went far beyond simple financial fraud. Oswald Merrill wasn't just a thief, he was an intermediary for criminals. And Michael, the son of America's greatest female chess player, was in the middle of it all, trying to do the right thing while protecting his mother. Suddenly, Michael's sudden death no longer seemed like a coincidence. And Amelia's disappearance was no longer a mystery. It was a matter of survival. She didn't flee just from fame or pain. She fled from whoever was behind Oswald. She hid, became invisible, abdicated her throne so that her grandson, the last legacy of her son, could live. The magnitude of her sacrifice hit Richard with the force of a train. He, in his ivory tower and arrogance, had been playing with fire unknowingly, and the woman he had humiliated was the only one who knew the true extent of the blaze. A new feeling, stronger than rage and shame, began to take hold of Richard. Responsibility. He could no longer be a spectator. His acquisition of the fund, his silence, his deliberate ignorance had made him an accomplice, even if indirectly. He looked at the photo of Leo on the screen. The young man was not just Amelia's grandson. He was the son of a man who tried to be a hero, and, unknowingly, Leo might be in danger. The evidence Michael mentioned, where could it be? Had it been destroyed? Or was it hidden? A ticking time bomb waiting to be found. And what if the people behind Oswald were still out there? After 30 years, their power and wealth might have multiplied. They wouldn't hesitate to silence any new threat. Amelia's chess move, live-streamed, with the Russian grandmaster drawing attention to her identity, could have been the trigger. She had exposed herself, and in doing so, she had exposed her grandson. That night, Amelia's sleep was interrupted by a noise coming from the living room. Her heart raced. She got up silently, her protective instinct sharpened by years of vigilance. She grabbed a heavy metal candlestick from the dresser, her hand steady despite the fear. Step by step, she moved through the dark hallway. The front door was ajar, and a thin sliver of streetlight cut through the darkness. She held her breath. Had someone broken into the house? Was Leo in danger? She crept up to the door, her heart pounding in her throat. She looked through the crack, and what she saw froze her. It wasn't a thief. Across the street, under the weak light of a street lamp, there was a dark, unmarked car. Inside, the silhouette of a man. He wasn't doing anything, just watching her house. The past was no longer knocking at her door. It was already on her street, waiting. Adrenaline gave way to a glacial chill. They found her. After 30 years, the peace she had built with so much effort was about to shatter. She retreated from the door, her hands trembling, the candlestick now feeling like a useless toy. Her first thought was of Leo, who slept soundly in his room, oblivious to the approaching threat. She needed to get him out of there, needed to run away again. But where to? The world was smaller now. The technology that allowed Richard to find her in a day could allow others, with much worse intentions, to do the same. She felt cornered, a king in check position with few squares to move to. It was then that her phone, a simple device she rarely used, vibrated on the living room table. An unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered. On the other end, a voice she recognized instantly, but which sounded different, stripped of all arrogance. It was Richard, and what he said next changed the board forever. "Mrs. Amelia," he said, his voice urgent and grave. "Don't hang up. You and your grandson are in danger, and I know why." Amelia's world, already listing dangerously, collapsed with Richard's voice. The shock of his revelation, overlaid with the palpable fear of the dark car across the street, created a vortex of panic in her chest. How could he know? How could the man who saw her only as part of the furniture in his luxurious office have access to the darkest, most painful secrets of her life? Instinct, honed by 30 years of flight, screamed at her to hang up, to cut that dangerous link with a world she had abandoned. But the urgency in his voice, stripped of his usual arrogance and tinged with something resembling genuine fear, made her hesitate. "What are you talking about?" she whispered into the phone, her voice a trembling thread, while her eyes remained fixed on the menacing silhouette outside. That car was not a coincidence. The chess move had not been just a slip. It had been a flare fired into the darkness, and now the predators were closing in. On the other end of the line, in the security of his penthouse, Richard sensed her fragility, and the urgency of the situation hit him full force. He had no time for pleasantries or trying to justify his past actions. "Oswald Merrill," he said, the name dropping like a stone into the silence between them. "The investment fund, your son, Michael. I know what he discovered, Mrs. Amelia, and I know that, in a way I never understood until today, my business ended up covering up Merrill's disappearance. I didn't know, I swear, but that doesn't matter now. What matters is that your appearance, the genius you showed, drew attention, and the people Merrill worked for, they don't forget." Every word was a confession, an acknowledgement of the moral debt he owed her, a debt far greater than any liability on his balance sheets. All his capital, all his fortune, seemed insignificant in the face of the moral bankruptcy he now confronted. Amelia felt her legs weaken and leaned against the cold living room wall. He knew. The secret she had carried like a cross for 3 decades was exposed. The memory of Michael, of his frightened face in his last days, of his whisper about the proof he had saved, flooded her. For years, she had convinced herself that silence would protect her, that invisibility was her fortress. Now, she saw the foolishness of her thinking. She wasn't safe. She was just postponing the inevitable. But mistrust was still a barrier. "And why should I trust you?" she asked, her voice recovering some of its firmness. "You, who humiliated me in front of everyone, now want to be my savior." The accusation was fair, and Richard accepted it without defense. "You shouldn't," he replied with brutal honesty, "but I am your only option right now. I have resources. I have security. I can get you out of there before they decide to act. Consider this the payment of a debt I didn't even know I had. Let me protect your grandson, for your son." The mention of Leo was the key. Her grandson's sleeping face appeared in her mind, pure and innocent. Everything was for him. It always had been. She looked through the crack in the door again. The internal lights of the dark car briefly flickered on, revealing not one, but 2 men sitting inside. Amelia's stomach chilled. They weren't just watching, they were waiting. The decision had to be made, and it had to be now. Trust the man who was the symbol of everything she despised in the world, or face alone the threat that stole her son and her life. She closed her eyes, the image of the chessboard in her mind. This was the most important move of her life, and she saw no safe way out. "I have a place," Richard's voice sounded urgent on the phone. Completely safe. My team can be there in 10 minutes. They won't know where you went, but you need to give me the answer now." Amelia's heart hammered uncontrollably. She opened her mouth to answer, but before any sound could escape, a metallic click from across the street cut through the night. The dark car door was opening. The sound of the car door opening was like the beginning of a countdown to disaster. Time, suddenly, seemed to distort for Amelia, each second stretching into an eternity of dread. The two silhouettes that emerged from the vehicle did not have the rush of common thieves. They moved with a deliberate calm, a frightening confidence of those who fear no witness. They crossed the street, their steps echoing in the quiet night. Amelia's instinct screamed. There was no more time for hesitation, for mistrust. There was only the visceral need to protect her grandson. "Yes," she said into the phone, the word coming out in a breath of air, almost inaudible. "Yes, now." On the other side of the line, Richard didn't waste an instant. "Don't hang up," he ordered, his voice now that of a commander on a battlefield. "Go to your grandson's room. Lock the door. Don't make noise. My men are already on the way. They will use a code. Do not open the door for anyone who doesn't say White Queen." Amelia moved with a speed that belied her age. Fear gave her the agility of a lioness. She slid down the hallway, the phone pressed against her ear, and entered Leo's room. He was sleeping deeply, his face serene, oblivious to the siege closing around them. For a moment, she just wanted to hug him, to shield him with her own body, but there was no time. With trembling hands, she locked the door and dragged a heavy dresser to block it, the sound of the wood scraping against the floor sounding like thunder in her ears. Outside, she heard knocking on the front door. They weren't polite knocks. They were dry, authoritative blows. "Open the door," a muffled voice commanded. She huddled in the darkest corner of the room, Leo's body between her and the door. Her mind, the same mind that could visualize hundreds of moves on a board, was now blank, dominated by primitive terror. Meanwhile, Richard was in his private control room, a space adjacent to his office that few knew existed. Screens displayed city maps, security camera feeds, and encrypted communications. He wasn't just a billionaire. He was a man who understood that true wealth, true power, came from information and the ability to act upon it. He coordinated the operation with cold precision, the adrenaline focusing his mind in a way no stock market negotiation ever could. "Torres, what's the status?" he asked into his communicator. 2 minutes to target, sir. 2 men at the front door. No sign of forced entry yet." Richard looked at a monitor displaying a floor plan of Amelia's house, obtained from public records. "I need a clean extraction, Torres. No confrontation, if possible. The objective is to get the 2 of them out without being seen." He knew he was putting his men at risk, and himself in a vulnerable position. His business, his fortune, could be threatened if his connection to Amelia came to light in the wrong way. But for the first time, financial risks seemed trivial. In the dark room, Leo began to stir, awakened by the noise. "Grandma," he murmured, his voice sleepy. "What's happening?" Amelia put a finger to his lips, her heart tight. How to explain to him that the safe world she had built was an illusion? The knocking on the front door stopped. A sinister silence settled in the house. Amelia held her breath, every fiber of her being on alert. What was worse, the noise or the silence? Then she heard a new sound, the sound of breaking glass, coming from the kitchen at the back of the house. They were inside. The phone in her hand was still connected to Richard. He heard the sound too. "Torres, they're inside. Entry through the back. Change of plan. Converge now." Amelia heard footsteps inside the house, slow, methodical. They were searching, coming toward the hallway, coming toward their room. The doorknob of Leo's room turned. It met the lock. There was a pause, and then a violent crash as a shoulder collided with the wood. The door shook, but the dresser held it. Another crash, stronger. The wood began to crack. Leo was now fully awake, fear etched in his eyes. Amelia hugged him tightly, closing her eyes, waiting for the final impact, the end of her long escape. The bedroom door trembled under a third impact, the wood yielding with an agonizing groan. Splinters flew into the room, and the corridor light invaded the darkness, drawing the silhouette of a burly man in the opening gap. Amelia pressed Leo against her, a human shield against the imminent terror, her face buried in his hair so as not to see the end. The sound of the world seemed to have disappeared, replaced by the deafening hum of her own panic. She braced herself for the scream, for the violence, for the outcome she had feared for 30 years. But instead, what followed was a series of surreal noises, a dull thud, a grunt of surprise, and the heavy sound of a body falling in the hallway. Amelia dared to open her eyes. The silhouette in the doorway was gone. In its place, another figure appeared, leaner, dressed in black from head to toe. The man raised a hand to show he was unarmed. "White Queen," he said, his voice calm and professional, cutting the tension like a knife. It was Torres. He and his team, moving with the silent efficiency of ghosts, had entered the house through the back seconds after the intruders, neutralizing them before they could reach their target. "Mrs. Santos, we need to go. Now," Torres said, without ceremony. He helped move the dresser, while another of his men ensured Leo, pale and in shock, was on his feet. Leo's world had turned upside down in a matter of minutes. His grandmother, the quiet, gentle woman who made his breakfast, was at the center of a clandestine operation worthy of a spy movie. "Grandma, who are these people? What's going on?" he asked, confusion battling fear in his voice. "I'll explain everything, my dear, I promise. But now, we have to trust them," Amelia replied, the Grandmaster's authority resurfacing in her tone, a calm forged in countless battles of intelligence and nerves. They were guided out of the house, past the two intruders now tied and gagged on the living room floor. Amelia averted her gaze, not wanting to see the faces that would haunt her. An unmarked car, different from the one that was watching them, waited for them in the back alley, the engine already running. In less than 5 minutes since the first knock on the door, Amelia and Leo were inside the vehicle, which pulled away smoothly into the night, leaving behind the small house that had been their refuge for so long. As the car sped away, Leo looked out the back window at his street, at his life, which grew smaller and more distant. Amelia, on the other hand, did not look back. Her focus was on the future, on the next moves. She held her grandson's trembling hand, a link to reality amidst the chaos. The phone Torres had returned to her rang. It was Richard. "Are you safe?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "We are," Amelia replied. "Thanks to you." There was a moment of silence. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now, I'm taking you to a safe place," Richard said, "a place where no one would think to look for you. And then we fight back." The phrase took Amelia by surprise. Fight back. She had spent her whole life running. The idea of fighting was strange, almost unthinkable. "Fight back how?" she questioned. "Your son mentioned proof, Mrs. Amelia, proof he hid. If that proof still exists, it can expose not just Oswald Merrill, but the entire scheme behind him. It's our only play. It's our only path to checkmate." The mention of Michael's proof made Amelia's heart race. She had never known where he hid it. Michael, in his attempt to protect her, had kept the location a complete secret. "I don't know where it is," she admitted, her voice strained by frustration. "He never told me." Richard paused. "Maybe he didn't tell you in words," he mused, his sharp strategist's mind already working. "Think, Mrs. Amelia. Your son knew you better than anyone. He knew how your mind worked. If he wanted to leave a clue that only you could understand, where would he hide it?" The question hung in the air, and then, like lightning, a forgotten memory flashed in Amelia's mind. A birthday gift Michael had given her shortly before he died. A gift she had kept, untouched for 30 years, a travel chess set with carved wooden pieces, and a single piece that always seemed different, heavier than the others. The White King. Amelia's revelation in the car was like a master move in a game that seemed lost. "The White King," she whispered, her voice choked by the rediscovery of a buried memory. "It's heavier. Michael gave it to me for my birthday, a month before. Before everything. I never understood it. I thought it was just a manufacturing defect." Leo stared at her, trying to assimilate the torrent of information. His grandmother, the disappeared grandmaster, his father, a witness to a dangerous crime, and now, a secret hidden in a chess piece. On speakerphone, Richard's mind processed the information instantly. "A perfect hiding place," he said, a tone of admiration in his voice. "Something of incalculable sentimental value to you, but zero monetary value to anyone else. No one would ever look there." The car plunged into the underground garage of an anonymous residential building in an upscale but discreet neighborhood. It wasn't the opulence of Midtown. It was the security of invisibility, something Richard, with all his wealth, also knew how to buy. The apartment was a sanctuary of minimalist luxury, impersonal, but equipped with the highest security technology. It was a gilded cage, a refuge that contrasted brutally with the humble warmth of the home they had been forced to abandon. Richard appeared on a large wall screen, his face tired, but his eyes lit with a new determination. "Mrs. Amelia, I need you to tell me exactly where the chess set is." "It's in my room," she replied, her voice firm, "in a shoebox, under the bed, along with other memories." She didn't need to say they were the newspaper clippings of her past life. Richard understood. That small collection of belongings was the entire estate of her former identity. "It's too risky for you to go back. Torres, you heard. The house is compromised, but a quick in and out is our best chance. They won't expect an immediate return." While Torres and his team left for the dangerous mission, a heavy silence settled in the apartment. Leo, who had been paralyzed by shock until then, finally turned to his grandmother. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked, the pain in his voice more cutting than any accusation. "About Grandpa, about who you were." Amelia pulled him close, sitting on the soft leather sofa. For the first time in 30 years, she tore down the wall she had built around her heart. She spoke about Michael, not as the absent father of her simplified stories, but as the courageous young man he was. She told him about his integrity, about how he discovered that powerful men, multi-millionaires, were using their businesses to hide illicit money, and how he refused to stay silent. "I didn't tell you to protect you, my love," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Silence was the price of your safety. Your father died because he knew the truth. I disappeared so you could live." The confession was a moment of pain and liberation. Leo hugged her, understanding finally replacing confusion. He wasn't just the grandson of a cleaner. He was the son of a hero and the grandson of a queen. On the screen, Richard watched the scene in silence, a knot forming in his throat. He, who measured people's worth by their net assets and their ability to generate profit, was witnessing a human connection so profound that no fortune could buy it. He felt the weight of his past complicity, the emptiness of a life dedicated to accumulating assets without a soul. The wait seemed like an eternity. Finally, the door opened and Torres entered, silent as always. In his hands, he carried an old, dusty shoebox. He placed it on the glass coffee table with the care of one handling a sacred artifact. The air in the room became electric. Amelia, Leo, and Richard, on the screen, held their breath. With trembling hands, Amelia opened the box. Inside, the modest travel chess set. She ignored all the other pieces. Her fingers, guided by memory and hope, closed around the White King. With all their fates contained in that small object, Amelia twisted the base of the piece. There was a soft click, The sound of a 30-year-old secret about to be revealed. The click of the chess piece echoed in the tense silence of the apartment, a tiny sound carrying the weight of 3 decades. The base of the White King came loose, revealing a hollow cavity. Inside, rolled up with surgical precision, was a small cylinder of yellowed paper, so fragile it seemed it could disintegrate to the touch. It wasn't a flash drive or a microchip. As Richard might have expected, it was an analog secret from the pre-digital era, a testament to the time when the most dangerous information was entrusted to paper and ink. With infinite care, Amelia extracted the paper roll, her calloused hands moving with the delicacy of an artisan. She slowly unrolled it on the coffee table. They weren't complex documents or financial spreadsheets. It was a single sheet, covered in Michael's hurried but clear handwriting. It was a list of names, dates, and account numbers in offshore tax havens, names that made Richard's blood run cold. They were prominent figures in the country's financial and political scene, people with whom he had done business, whose fortunes were legendary and whose reputations were impeccable. They were the true kings and queens of the board, the players who pulled the strings of power in the shadows. Oswald Merrill was not the mastermind. He was just a disposable pawn. Next to each name, Michael had noted transaction details, creating a web that linked them all to the money laundering scheme. At the bottom of the list, a small note read, "The core proof is in the move. Anderson's immortal. He showed me how to see it." Leo, looking over his grandmother's shoulder, frowned. "Anderson's immortal. What does that mean?" Amelia felt a chill. The Immortal Game. One of the most famous chess matches in history, known for its audacious sacrifices and brilliant finish. Her husband, Michael's father, was obsessed with that game. He had taught it to Michael when the boy was small. It was their secret language. "It's not physical evidence," Amelia said, her mind working furiously, connecting the pieces. "It's a code, a pattern." Richard, on the screen, watched with feverish intensity. "A pattern in the transactions?" he asked, already anticipating the answer. "The dates, the values, do they correspond to the moves of the game?" It was an idea so brilliant and so dangerous that only a mind like Michael's could conceive it. He had transformed the evidence of the crime into a cipher based on a chess match, a code that only his mother, a grandmaster, could fully decipher. The list of names was the key, but the game was the map that showed how everything connected. "We need the original financial records of Merrill's fund," Richard said, excitement in his voice. "My contacts can get the archived digital files, even after so long. If we can cross-reference the list of names with the patterns of the Immortal Game, we'll have irrefutable proof." Hope, for the first time, seemed real. They didn't just have a weapon, they had a plan of attack. Justice for Michael, freedom for Amelia and Leo, redemption for Richard. Everything depended on deciphering that final enigma. But as the euphoria of the moment enveloped them, a discreet notification flashed in the corner of one of Richard's security screens. It was an alert from one of his informants on the dark web. The excitement on Richard's face vanished, replaced by a mask of alarm. He had placed digital watchdogs on all the names on Michael's list as soon as he read them, and one of them had just reacted. "What is it?" Amelia asked, noticing the sudden change in his expression. Richard didn't answer immediately. He magnified the alert window, reading the encrypted information. His face went pale. The main name on Michael's list, a reclusive billionaire considered a pillar of the national economy, a man he himself admired for his supposed business genius, had just made a single terrifying transaction. He wasn't moving funds or stocks. He was activating a clean-up protocol, a euphemism that, in the underworld where that man operated, meant only one thing: erasing all loose ends, permanently. The alert didn't specify the targets, but it didn't need to. Richard looked at the faces of Amelia and Leo, illuminated by the hope of discovery. They had found the key to victory, but in doing so, Unknowingly, they had triggered the enemy's final trap. The opposing king, sensing checkmate approaching, had just ordered the sacrifice of all pieces that could lead back to him, including the 3 people in that room. Richard's face on the screen contorted into a mask of terror that Amelia had never imagined possible in the arrogant man she knew. "Clean-up protocol," he repeated, his voice hoarse. "It's not about sending more thugs. It's worse. It's a total, silent, devastating attack. He's going to erase us from the system. He's going to use his immense fortune and influence to freeze my assets, to launch a speculative attack against my company, to destroy my net worth in a matter of hours. Without money, without power, I won't be able to protect you. We'll be nothing. Digital and financial ghosts. That's how he silences people. He doesn't take life. He takes existence." Before the sentence was finished, a sharp, strident alarm sounded, not in the apartment, but coming from the speakers connected to Richard. On the screen behind him, charts that previously showed profits and dividends plunged into bloody red. The war had begun. "It's an algorithmic attack," Richard said, his fingers flying across a keyboard. "He's using high-frequency bots to short-sell my company's stock, creating market panic. At the same time, he's attacking our servers, trying to blind us." The main screen showed Richard's company's net worth plummeting in real time. Millions of dollars evaporated every second. It was a capital hemorrhage on a monumental scale, a demonstration of brute power meant to crush any resistance. Leo approached the screen, eyes wide. "The security network is being overwhelmed. It's a denial of service attack on a scale I've never seen. It's coming from everywhere at once." Richard looked like a captain on a sinking ship. Sweat ran down his forehead. "Torres!" he yelled. "Get them out of here. Take them to an embassy. Anywhere. I'll hold him off as long as I can." It was an order of sacrifice. He was willing to sink with his empire to give them a chance. "No," said a calm but unwavering voice. It was Amelia. She stood up and walked toward the screen, her eyes not on the chaos of the red numbers, but on the structure of the attack. Where others saw panic, she saw a board. "He is arrogant," she said, her voice clear and precise, "like you were, Dr. Richard. This attack is powerful, but it's too showy. He is opening all his flanks for a crushing central attack. He assumes you will try to defend everything at once. Don't do that." Richard paused, looking at her image on the screen. "What do you suggest?" he asked, his voice that of a pupil to his master. "Don't defend the edges. Let him take the pawns," she continued, her gaze fixed. "He wants you to be distracted by the loss of money. The real target is your central server, your king. Concentrate all your defenses there. Leo," she turned to her grandson, "this attack, because it is so large, must have a command point. Find it." Inspired by her calm, the team united. Leo, his fingers dancing on the keyboard of a laptop Torres handed him, began tracing the data flow, ignoring the peripheral attacks and following his grandmother's strategic guidance. Richard, in turn, stopped trying to save his stocks and started building impenetrable firewalls around his core system. He was sacrificing his fortune to protect the only thing that mattered, the information. "I found it!" Leo exclaimed. "It's a single proxy server, masked by thousands of others. It's his move." Amelia nodded. "Now, Dr. Richard, the counterattack." "I'm almost out of liquidity," Richard said, desperate. "We don't have the firepower." "We don't need power," Amelia said. "We need precision. Use what little you have left, not to attack, but to expose. It's a queen sacrifice." The instruction was clear. Richard understood. With a final command, he liquidated a huge personal investment fund, injecting massive capital not to fight the enemy, but to create a direct, secure channel out of his network. At the same instant, Leo sent the file, Michael's list, the immortal game code, and the proof they had just validated, through that channel, to a list of contacts Richard had prepared. International regulatory agencies, the world's largest newspapers. The information was free. Immediately, the attack ceased. The red screens stopped flashing. Silence returned, deeper and heavier than before. The war had ended in a single brilliant move. Then, a private message appeared on Richard's main screen. It wasn't a threat, it was a single sentence, sent by the billionaire they had just exposed. An admission of defeat, coming from a king to a queen. Checkmate. The silence that followed the checkmate message was deeper than any Richard had ever experienced in his soundproof penthouse. The war was over. On the screen, the charts stopped bleeding, stabilizing into a landscape of financial ruin. Richard's empire had been dismantled, his vast fortune reduced to a fraction. But, for the first time in his life, he felt incredibly light. He hadn't lost. He had sacrificed his queen to save the king, and in the process, the entire game. In the hours and days that followed, the world felt the impact of that single move. The information released by them spread like wildfire, bringing down the most powerful men in the country. The scandal rocked the stock market, but also initiated a much-needed cleanup. Justice, slow but relentless, began its work. Michael Santos' name went from a forgotten footnote to a national hero headline. Months later, the dust had settled. Richard was no longer the arrogant CEO of Midtown. He had lost his penthouse, his onyx board, most of his fortune. What remained of his capital? He used to create a foundation in Michael Santos's name, dedicated to funding young talents in technology and promoting ethics in business. His new office didn't have a skyline view, but a large window overlooking a small park. He worked alongside Leo, who became the foundation's director of technology, using his brilliance not to accumulate wealth, but to create tools that ensured the transparency and justice his father had sought. Richard discovered that true net worth was not in his assets, but in the purpose he had found. The highest return on his new investment was peace of mind. Amelia Santos was no longer invisible. Her return to the world of chess was met with astonishment and admiration. Invitations to tournaments, interviews, and lectures poured in, but she refused them all. Her glory was no longer on international stages, but in a modest community center hall in her neighborhood. There, surrounded by children of all ages, she taught chess. She taught them not only strategy, but patience, respect for the opponent, and the lesson that even the most humble piece, a pawn, can determine the outcome of the game. She had reclaimed her name, but chose to give it a new meaning, far from fame and closer to people's hearts. The legacy she was building was not of trophies, but of futures. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, Richard went to the community center. He didn't wear a designer suit, but a simple shirt and jeans. In his hands, he carried a modest wooden chess set. Amelia smiled when she saw him, a genuine, warm smile. Without saying a word, she pointed to a small table in the corner, away from the joyful noise of the children. He set up the pieces. "I never truly learned how to play," Richard admitted, his voice devoid of any trace of his former arrogance. "I learned how to win." "They are different things." Amelia sat across from him. "There's still time to learn," she said softly. She picked up a white pawn and moved it 2 squares forward. "The game always gives you a new chance to start." Richard looked at the board, at the woman across from him, and at the children in the background. He had lost a kingdom of money, but gained a world of humanity. He reached out and made his first move, not as a king, but as a man learning, finally. The true art of the game.